Hello, everyone. I am met here today with Angela Hywood, who is a fellow naturopathic clinician. She's also a mother of two. She's been in clinical practice for 24 years, and she specialises in children's and women's health, as well as hormones and fertility. She's an active international lecturer in the fields of botanical medicine and naturopathy. She's also published books on naturopathy and as well as in medical textbooks. She's got a rich knowledge. She is incredible, and she has worked alongside one of Australia's leaders in botanical medicine, Professor Kerry Bone. She's the founder of, now am I going to say this right, Floralia Wellness Apothecary in Western Australia. Thank you so much for joining us, Angela.
Thanks for having me, Britt. It's so lovely to see you again and reconnect.
Yeah, reconnect. I used to rent a room off you in Willara when you had your clinical practice in Sydney. That would have been, what, 6, 7, maybe 8 years ago now?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been back in Western Australia for 5 years.
Okay. Yeah.
I came back with, an 18-month-old baby and an 11-day-old baby. So I always know my daughter's 5. We've been back 5 years.
Yeah, wow. Okay, well, Sydney misses you, but I'm sure WA is reaping the benefits of all your knowledge and your new clinic, which is super exciting. So we're going to talk about herbs and immune support. Obviously, it's very topical at the moment, and I thought, who's like the one person who is the herb nerd that's going to be able to answer all the burning questions that I have? So to start off with, and to kind of create a bit of a base, how do we use herbs? Are we using them as a preventative medicine? Are we using them in acute illness? Can you give us a bit of background on how they're used?
Absolutely. So herbs are the mainstay of my practice and always have been my first go-to modality. And as you mentioned, I've just been incredibly lucky to have been mentored and work alongside Professor Kerry Bone, whose brain is just like a superpower of botanical knowledge. So he's really taught me the art, but also the depth of the science of botanical medicine, which I love because I actually first came from a pharmacy background. So science and pharmacology and drug pharmacokinetics and toxicology has always been something that I've been really passionate about. So we're so incredibly lucky to have our dispensaries, which is an alchemy of herbs, and I use them to rejuvenate, rebalance, restore harmony. I love them as a modality because they're incredibly gentle and they're incredibly safe, but we can't underestimate their power in an acute ailment as well. We can use them from a newborn baby to the very elderly and literally everybody in between. And what a lot of people, I think, don't understand.
Sorry, I just clicked the wrong button on my computer. Keep going.
That's okay. What a lot of people in the general public don't understand is that naturopaths are all trained in herbal medicine, and we're actually degree qualified. We invest a very bare minimum of 4 years studying this art and the science of this incredibly ancient modality. And I can tell you, before there were pharmaceutical companies and drugs around, and patented drugs, mind you, that drive billions of dollars of profit for the pharma industry, there were herbs for the people. Every culture's used botanical medicine in a unique way, and herbs are a part of our birthright as far as I'm concerned. So I use botanical medicines for acute ailments. I use them for chronic conditions. I use them literally for every patient. There's not many patients that escape our practice without a magical amber bottle filled with very carefully considered and prescribed botanical medicines. So really,
liquid herbs in your practice, is that right?
Predominantly liquid herbs in my practice. I still carry tablets for some herbs that are actually more stable in the tablet form or give a better medicinal effect. There's the rare few. And 2 examples of that are turmeric and saw palmetto, purely because of the concentration you need those herbs in, and the way that the manufacturers can produce them to deliver that concentration in a tablet. But no, the majority of my patients come to me through word of mouth or referral, knowing that they will be prescribed some pretty interesting tasting liquid herbs, but they come to me for that, literally that art of formulation, you know, that craft and our ability to completely personalize that perfect combination of herbs to provide them, you know, relief from their ailments, you know, relief from acute conditions or relief from chronicity of what they're dealing with. And as you mentioned, a lot of my patients are, you know, hormonal issues. I deal with a lot of fertility complications and complexities in pregnancy as well. So liquid herbs are my go-to, purely because, you know, we have a dispensary of over 200 extracts, so it allows the most exquisite bespoke personalisation for what that patient needs. No tablet can deliver that, because they are off the shelf. So liquid herbs are a mainstay of what we do here at Floralia Wellness.
So, I mean, you mentioned that herbal medicine was the foundations of which medicine was formed. I mean, willow is the perfect example of that, for which aspirin, is that right? Aspirin,
correct,
founded from, basically. And there's so many other examples exactly like that, where herbs have transformed into pharmaceutical medicines eventually. So why is it so tricky to find evidence for herbal medicine? Why is it such a, I guess it can be under fire at times, and people can say, oh, it's, you know, traditional medicine, there's no evidence for it. Why is it so difficult for us to get evidence for herbal medicines?
I think the integration of herbs and other forms of traditional medicine into the evidence-based medicine model is actually starting to be done. There's about 50 to 60 herbs with a good stack of quality published clinical study and evidence. However, the biggest problem that we face from a traditional medicine or a natural medicine industry is that to do clinical studies, you need funding. And to run a clinical study, it's expensive. You need to recruit patients. You need to recruit scientists who know how to run good quality clinical trials. You need medicines for the clinical trials. So this is the problem that we face in the industry, is a lack of sufficient funding to run large clinical trials and progress them over the years to very big ones to really find our evidence. The reason that there's not the funding is you just can't patent a drug of natural origin. So if you find an incredible level of evidence for, let's just use echinacea as an example, as an immune modulator, you can't patent it because it's of natural origin. You can't say to, you know, someone who lives in North America who's growing echinacea in their garden, oh no, sorry, you can't use that because it's growing in your garden because we own the patent. And patents is what drives the profitability in pharmaceutical companies. So essentially, it's a money issue and it's a political issue, which frustrates me no end. I'm actually studying a postgrad degree at the moment in evidence-based complementary medicine, and you know, these facts have become alarmingly clear to me during the course of this new degree that I've undertaken. It's a sad reality, but nonetheless it is a reality. And as you mentioned, you're right, like a lot of drugs are actually synthesized from, you know, an incredible phytochemical that the scientists have discovered in a plant. So then what happens is they engineer that molecule to become a pharmaceutical agent that then goes into testing so they can reproduce it to then produce a drug from it eventually. And then the, you know, billions of dollars of profit that something like that might drive.
Yeah.
So that's why it's really sad and it's frustrating. But it doesn't mean, if there's not a clinical study around a herb, it doesn't mean that we discredit the traditional use or the traditional evidence. The traditional evidence does play an important role in our knowledge about how a herb works.
Yeah, Yeah, so well put. It can be so frustrating, but I guess, you know, all that clinical experience that you have, there's nothing better than clinical case studies, giving herbs or herbal formulations for specific conditions and keeping track of progress and results. And, you know, the evidence is certainly clear from a clinical perspective anyway. Yeah.
Absolutely. You know, would I, you know, if I want to know, you know, which herb is better for endometriosis, is it boswellia as an anti-inflammatory to reduce pain, or is it turmeric? You know, would I necessarily look in a textbook? Yeah, I might, but what I'm actually more inclined to do is ring a colleague who's got a depth of experience with that condition and say, can you share some experience with me? What do you find works better clinically?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
both are important, but clinical knowledge and sharing clinical knowledge is so critically important.
And wouldn't it be amazing if we create a bank of all that knowledge with all, you know, the herbalists throughout the world, if there was a better way of keeping records as well? That would be incredible. Okay, so let's dive into immune. I want you to explain, because I've heard you explain this so well before in previous webinars. Can you explain what a Th1 to Th2 response is, and how that might affect someone's immunity or susceptibility to infections or even autoimmunity?
Absolutely. So, look, the immune system is exquisitely complex. It is fascinating. And I think there's still a lot we don't understand about immunology. It's a relatively new, like, specialisation and science in terms of the history of medicine. So let's just explore what a T cell is. T cells are called so because they're predominantly produced in the thymus gland, which is in our throat. And the thymus gland doesn't get talked about very much anymore. It's a little bit forgotten. The thymus gland's responsible for our immunological function. It's incredible. It directs, you know, our bone marrow to produce beautiful immune cells, and, you know, no doubt probably has a big role in regulating our bowel flora and the role that our flora in our bowel play in our immunity as well. So T cells recognise foreign particles, which are called antigens, and they have a high variability, so they're called T cell receptors. And there's T cells that are called T helper cells and cytotoxic T cells. Now, the T helper cells and other cells of the immune system, really their job is to look for strange and foreign things in our bloodstream that are not a part of our human body. So they're our army, they're our defence. So the Th1 cells tend to generate response against intracellular organisms like bacteria and virus. So they survey and detect bacteria and virus and then trigger the immunological defences so that we can produce histamine, disarm them, recognise them, get our body involved in producing antibodies against them, so that we are building this recognition defense system. So we know, okay, we know what you are, virus, antibody, go and do your work, and immune system, arm and defend. Our Th2 cells produce immune responses to worms and parasites. So they're quite different. So, and again, because they're probably molecularly more complex, they're not just a single cell organism. They're looking for worms and producing immune defense against them. It's really interesting, actually. I've, you know, I've thought a lot about this, having young children, and about, you know, worms. I think they all gross us out incredibly. Any mother who's seen a pinworm will always freak out. However, there's schools of thoughts and theories that worms actually help us build a good Th2 response, which is actually protective against autoimmune disease.
Yeah, is this helminth therapy?
Yes, absolutely. So some crazy immunologists in America are actually giving people parasites on purpose And what they're finding is it's settling down the Th1 to Th2 response and quietening down autoimmune disease. So should we jump at the gun necessarily all the time to treat pinworm in children and, you know, give combantrum or, you know, goodness forbid, our liquid herbs for worms? Well, you know, I think in my mind the jury's out. Are we supposed to get worms in childhood to build a better Th2 response to then potentially give us a more sophisticated immunological understanding in our immune system? So it's quite interesting stuff.
Yeah.
As I said, immunology is an exciting field of medical science, you know, if you're a geek like us, Britt. And it's so incredibly complex, but that's kind of cliff note versions on Th1, Th2. But getting that balance right is critically important for long-term immune wellness and particularly autoimmune prevention.
So when we're talking about immune support for viral pathogens, so whether it's the common cold or the flu, we often put our herbs into a class of being an immunomodulator. Can you explain what an immunomodulator works? Maybe give some examples of some common immunomodulators as well?
Absolutely. I think there's a lot of misinformation about really how herbs do work from the immunological point of view. So an immune modulator is a class of botanicals or any other natural substances that potentiate our body's own defence. They activate and boost and restore healthy and optimal immunological function. I often call them like functional foods, really, for our immune system. And one that we're all familiar with that I think is an amazing immune modulator that we have the choice to be able to use every day in our kitchen is shiitake mushrooms. You know, they're an incredible superfood or immune modulator for our immune system. So immune modulating botanicals can also be used, interestingly, to increase the effectiveness of some drugs. And this is this sort of emergent field with, you know, safe and concurrent use in chemotherapy, believe it or not. And there's clinical papers around a particular herb called astragalus for that action. And that herb's seen to actually be a beautiful adjunct in chemotherapy and radiotherapy and help reduce the side effects of the chemo and radio and give the patient's immune system better support, but the patient better quality of life through that period as well. So as mentioned, some beautiful examples are medicinal mushrooms: shiitake, maitake, reishi, lion's mane, cotinopsis. I've got a bit of a love affair for medicinal mushrooms at the moment.
Oh, amazing. So do I. Yeah. And the fact that there's virtually no side effects to mushrooms. Like, you can use them as a food. I'm using them in people who have autoimmune diseases as well. They're really, you know, so safe because they are literally food as medicine.
Absolutely. And that's why I adore them so much as well. Not to mention they look amazing. You know, the mushroom lion's mane is an incredible looking plant. For anyone listening or watching today, just Google lion's mane and have a look at this incredible mushroom. It's quite prehistoric. Look, some other immune modulators that often get forgotten is even licorice. Has an immune modulating activity, and it's also a beautiful, you know, sweet, soothing demulcent. It's a classic adrenal tonic herb, and I really feel that its immunologically active effects probably come from the fact that it supports adrenal function. And then a couple that, you know, we all know, ask any person out on the street, name one herb that you know works for the immune system. I think everyone will say, oh, echinacea. And it's a very classic archetypal immune modulator. A lot of people think, oh, that's the one we go to for acute infection. Well, believe it or not, the research actually says it's better for prevention and for feeding, nourishing and supporting the immune function. It's not the pretty flowering top that is used medicinally. It's actually the root of the echinacea plant for its specific active constituent called an alkyl amide. And that will give you the typical tingling taste on your tongue that you would experience with a really good quality echinacea. So if echinacea doesn't tingle, it's no good.
Is there any specific species that you favour? I know there's Purpurea and Angustifolia. Is one better than the other?
So I always, the way that I differentiate them in my clinical practice is generally I use a blend. So of an Angustifolia Purpurea blend, it's a 60% Purpurea, 40% Angustifolia. However, if I'm using echinacea for kids, I use Purpurea for pediatrics and more so Angustifolia for sort of that winter immune protection if I'm just using individual species. But yeah, I love the blend from a practical point of view for most of my patients is a great, but Purpurea is my choice for kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just a couple of other immune modulators. There's a beautiful Chinese one called Ligustium, and then a beautiful traditional Chinese one called Astragalus, which I've already mentioned. Astragalus is particularly noteworthy for people who are really stressed and really exhausted and their immune system is like straggling behind them. So it's a beautiful plant steeped in traditional Chinese culture.
And are you using it in acute? Because I remember learning in herbal medicine not to use it in acute because it can exacerbate acute infections. Is that where are you at with that? What's your thoughts?
Astragalus is better for prevention of infection, and I think that stands true for most of our immune modulators. So, you know, using medicinal mushrooms and echinacea and Astragalus day to day for prevention of infection, and think about them as like superfoods for the immune system, like the medicinal mushrooms. So you're right, and that interesting sort of contraindication of don't use Astragalus in an acute infection comes from its energetics from a Chinese medicine point of view.
Yeah.
So
okay.
that is one rule that I do steadfast stick to. Look, and unless a practitioner is fully trained in traditional Chinese medicine and Chinese herbs, on the odd occasion they might use Astragalus in an acute infection, but that's with their specifics of, you know, Chinese trainings. And I'm not a trained TCM practitioner. I am straight Western herbs, and I use a lot of Chinese and Ayurvedic herbs, but from a Western phytopharmacological perspective.
Yeah, and I guess it's because the energetics are cooling. So in theory, you could blend it with something like ginger, something with more of a warming constitution to offset that, I guess. Yeah, where our blends come into play. Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. Have we missed any immunomodulating herbs? I mean, garlic. You've written down here is another great one, which is so easy for anyone to get their hands on. I feel like you walk into a pharmacy now and the shelves are bare. You literally can't get anything with this light immune indication, but there's plenty of fresh garlic in the supermarket.
And, you know, garlic's one of Mother Nature's natural antibiotics. That's one that if you go hard and heavy on acute infection, garlic really does the job. So, and it is, yeah, it's freely available everywhere around. You can get fresh garlic, and if you're brave and bold, you can chew the garlic and then drink it down with a couple of glasses of water. And then it will convert over to the medicinal part of the constituent in your digestive system where it needs to go. So garlic's active constituent is actually inactive until you crush the garlic, converting the alliin to allicin, and that's that beautiful, you know, rich spice and, you know, oil activation that you feel when you chew a clove of garlic.
Yeah. But
so, yeah.
I crush a clove of garlic and put it in some honey and give it to them that way. It's kind of, but it's not too bad. Manuka honey and a clove of crushed garlic does the job.
Absolutely. And look, this time of the year, every year, I get busy and make garlic mel, which is a honey-infused garlic preparation where you just stuff a jar with as many cloves of garlic, just slightly crushed. Sorry, nearly knocked that over. and pop it in a jar of honey, and then let that sit in a nice warm place in the kitchen for a couple of weeks. And then you've got this most intense, beautiful garlic honey that you can use when sore throats come around or you need a natural antibiotic.
Yeah, perfect.
So, another herb that's not so much a kitchen herb is another Chinese herb, which is my go-to herb for acute infection, be it viral or bacterial. And often, a mother who's got a child that's coming down with a sore throat and infection, you don't know if it's viral or bacterial. So the beautiful thing with herbs is they're broad spectrum, and that's what's so great. You often don't need to differentiate between viral or bacterial. By the way, viral infections tend to have a higher fever for a longer period of time. So that's from a naturopath point of view. If the fever's really, really spiking, we need a higher febrile response to inhibit the replication of a virus versus bacteria. So the very last thing you want to be doing is giving like Panadol or Nurofen unless the fever is over 40 degrees. But you're better off just using, nice cold flannels and keeping the patient comfortable, because fever has a really critical role. It stops the replication of virus and bacteria. It's our immune system's first line defense.
Yeah, I always find when I let my kids ride that fever, they always either recover and we don't get to even figure out what the illness is, or it's a very much shorter duration. So I'm a big fan of riding it out. Yeah, like you said, the cool cloths, and peppermint oil and diluted lavender oil on the bottom of the feet always brings fever down a couple of degrees.
Absolutely. And a child or any adult who can mount a really good fever and sweat has a really robust immune system. It's a sign of good vital force. But just a key note, and something that I remind everyone, if the fever's over 40 degrees, you're sort of heading into more risk of like febrile convulsions. So that's when you might intervene from a pharmaceutical point of view.
Yeah.
Okay, but another great natural, really robust acute herb that you can go in with is andrographis. And this again is one we've learnt from traditional Chinese medicine. It's got consistent outcomes, consistent evidence from clinical studies as well. It's been very well researched. This is actually known as the king of bitters. When you taste it, it's incredibly bitter. And it's native and grows in both India and China. One of the active constituents is called an andrographilide, and that's been identified by research to really drive the infection. And that's very, very specific and keynote to respiratory infection management. It's a brilliant herb.
Great. Okay, so we've spoken about immunomodulators, we've spoken about antiviral and antibacterial herbs. There's a lot of talk about this current COVID-19 and the cytokine storm that it creates. And it was the same case also for the SARS COVID virus. Can you give us a bit of a background on what a cytokine storm is and how we might approach this from a natural medicine perspective? Are there any anti-inflammatories that we could give naturally, or that we should be just taking on a daily basis if we are inflamed? I mean, the stats coming out about obesity and people having concurrent comorbidities that are predisposing them to this particular infection is very apparent. Can you give us a bit of info on the cytokine storm?
So cytokine storm is really what in COVID-19 and SARS is leading to the lungs being filled with fluid. So that respiratory distress, which ends up being what drives the fatality with these two viruses. So cytokines are small proteins that are released by many different cells in the body, but including our immune system, and they coordinate the body's response against infection and trigger inflammation. because a little bit of inflammation in an infection is necessary, again, as a part of stopping the viral or bacterial replication. But when a patient goes into cytokine storm, the body just gets it, unfortunately, really wrong. So, as you mentioned, this is one that's been linked to both SARS and COVID, where the cytokine storm particularly happens in the lung, where you get a huge inflammatory response, and in response to that, you get tissue perfusion or fluid filling up into the lungs as a result of this hyperinflammation. So, yeah, it's a it's a real thing. It lesser affects young people because our immune systems are healthier and better able to drive the inflammation. But it's when you have people with inflammatory comorbidities and pre-existing cardiovascular disease, pre-existing obesity, that it really starts to become high risk. There's a really great article about the cytokine storm on a fantastic website called thenewscientist.com. And if you just go to there and type in cytokine storm, it gives a really thorough explanation. But in a nutshell, it's like a hyperinflammation storm that leads to tissue perfusion and the lungs filling with fluid that ends up pretty much drowning a patient. So there's been a lot of interjection in the natural medicine industry saying that, oh my goodness, some herbs can aggravate a viral infection and perpetuate a cytokine storm, so that they're, very dangerous. And, a range of herbs have been, mentioned in this implication. So, there's been a lot of inflammation in the industry per se about it. One of those that's been mentioned is echinacea, because of its role in treatment of infection. There is no evidence that echinacea root will inappropriately stimulate a cytokine response or a cytokine storm in response to a viral or bacterial infection. Viral infections can stimulate the release of at least 31 plus cytokines, and most were actually reversed by simultaneous administration of echinacea. So again, really clearly demonstrating that immune modulating effect of echinacea.
I did read a book on echinacea and SARS, and it was an in vitro study, but it showed that it was a potential preventative, I don't want to say treatment or cure, because that's not how we work, but it was definitely a potential agent in vitro of the SARS virus, and it acted as an anti-inflammatory as well as a potent antiviral.
Absolutely.
So obviously, studies needed.
Found regulate that cytokine response, which was amazing. So yeah, really showing that echinacea's got that modulating effect. It's really a sophisticated plant. It actually works in our body via the cannabinoid system. So is now also known as like an adaptogen to the body, then therefore by having an immunological balancing effect in the body. So the endocannabinoid systems, the new kid on the block in terms of science and understanding immunology. So yeah, in terms of the cytokine storm and management of that, I think we can certainly, for preventative medicine point of view, if people are concerned about getting the infection and the cytokine storm, using some well-positioned, well-researched botanical cytokine modulators or anti-inflammatories is the way to go. And turmeric and boswellia and ginger are some that I favour in that circumstance.
Okay, great. So let's kind of go back to fever, because I want to talk about elderberry versus elderflower and how they differ.
Yeah, absolutely. The berry versus the flower. So herbs can get as complex as different parts of the plants have different actions, and elder is a perfect case in point. So the berry, the black elderberry, has been researched for use during acute respiratory viral infections. The original research was conducted in the 70s and has expanded since then. Later research has also indicated a potential role for this berry, the black elderberry, as an immune enhancing herb. And there's been question again about it potentially being a problem with cytokine storm. Well, that's invalid. There's not enough evidence to say that it's a problem with the cytokine storm. And meta-analysis certainly supports its benefits when administered during acute viral infections. So it's got a specific antiviral respiratory therapeutic action. So an incredibly valuable plant for, you know, viral infection during this time that's respiratory focused.
And a meta-analysis being one of the highest levels of evidence. I mean, that would be in one of the 50 to 60 herbs that you mentioned earlier that have a high level of evidence for their use.
Absolutely. And, you know, why does something as humble as like elderberry have, you know, enough studies to be able to do a meta-analysis? Guess what? It comes from German tradition. And the German and the French and the Italians are good at investing money in medicines of natural origin. They still, especially Germany, still has a really high regard and respect for its traditional culture in medicine, which is botanicals. Thank goodness for that. You know, we all know, we've been to Europe, wander into any pharmacy in Europe and you get plenty of herbs, you can get homeopathy, you can get so much natural medicine, and they're all quite well versed in talking about it and explaining it to you. It's incredibly refreshing and enlightening.
Yeah. And there's this amazing formula that I got in Switzerland called Cytokine, which is actually elderflower. So it's for sinus infections, and it's one of the best things. Whenever someone goes to Europe, I'm like, can you bring me back some Cytokine? Because it not only tastes amazing, so my kids will take it, but it is so effective. It's so good.
Absolutely. No, it's exciting stuff. There was actually one really amazing clinical trial, and a big one with botanicals, with 473 patients that were confirmed with either influenza A or influenza B. And the trial looked at a combination of elderberry and echinacea to be given as soon as possible with symptom onset for 10 days. And it was as effective as the antiviral drug they tested it against.
Yeah.
Humble, simple, no side effects, as effective as the drug. And there was no suggestion of any harmful effects or induction of any cytokine storm using the combination of echinacea and elderberry. You mentioned the flower, elderflower. So I have elderberry and elderflower in my dispensary. And I always use elderflower for common flu or common cold as a diaphoretic. It actually, and this old-fashioned word diaphoretic means to support the body's natural febrile process so that you can have a healthy fever in order to then inhibit the viral or bacterial replication and get better quicker. So elderflower is something that, yeah, it's really beautiful for upper respiratory, supports, you know, nice healthy fever management, and is very easily taken as a herbal tea. It's as effective as a tea as it is in a tincture. So that's a really valuable, again, sort of kitchen herb that you can brew as a tea if your kids are getting a fever or if you're feeling a little under the weather yourself.
Yeah. So let's talk about herbs, because I'm aware that we don't have much time left. We've probably got about 10 minutes left. So herbs for specific alignments. So say cough, sore throats. As we're moving into winter, I guess it's important to know about these herbs and their potential actions, and also treating that post-viral cough that I see quite a lot of people at the end of winter and they still have this lingering cough. Can you talk about some herbs for those?
Absolutely. So there's a beautiful herb that, believe it or not, you can get in every pharmacy around Australia, and it's called ivy leaf, or its common name, well, the preparation is called propsan. Um, and interestingly, our TGA, Therapeutic Goods Administration, does not allow the sale of pharmaceutical cold and flu products for children under the age of 12. So pharmacies really often just go, oh, they have this herb ground ivy preparation that it works well, because they can't sell them cold and flu tabs, which is actually great. I think it's a huge benefit. So really, you know, parents need to be coming to their local naturopath or health food store to actually be getting the medicines. So ground ivy is a European plant and is particularly effective for chesty cough in children, but also it's very effective in adults. So that's that wet, chesty, lingering cough that we, as a mother, we can all hear it in our mind right now. Wild cherry is another one of my favourite. And this is a classic old herb used for cough in days gone by. My grandpa was a pharmacist as well, and I grew up in, you know, in his pharmacy. My dad's also a pharmacist, and, you know, grandpa used to make wild cherry extract to add to herbal mixes back then without even thinking that he was doing herbal medicine. He was just doing pharmacy.
Yeah.
And this is why most pharmaceutical cough preparations are actually, you know, cherry flavoured, because of the traditional use of wild cherry. Anyway, we use the bark, not the fruit, but that's a part of, I guess, pharmacy tradition. So wild cherry is really good for whooping cough or pertussis, bronchitis, so inflammation of the lung. At the same time as it has a really nice gentle sedative effect. So it's really good for night cough and clearing mucus. So you can use it for a wet cough or a dry cough. It's great. So that's that really good one for lingering post-viral hacking cough that you sometimes hear some mucus still associated with. There's another beautiful one called white horehound. And this dates back to Roman and Egyptian times. The priests of Egypt called this the seed of Horus. So that's how ancient this herb is. It's specific for the lung and breathing problems. So again, we use it for pertussis or whooping cough, asthma. They used to give it for tuberculosis, bronchitis and swelling in the bronchial passages. So asthma, it's a real key indicator. Then I'm going to take you on a journey to another continent, and that's now Africa. And there's a Zulu herb called Pelargonium. And this is, so it's South African geranium is its common name. And this is a well-known herb for the child's lung. It's antibacterial, it has an anti-influenza effect. And there is so much clinical research on this particular herb to reduce staphylococcal infections in the lung, E. coli, Klebsiella, Pseudomonas, heme influenza. It's also been studied for antibacterial effect against some multi-drug resistant bacteria. It inhibits the growth of mycoplasma. We use it for bronchitis, sinusitis, upper and lower respiratory tract infections. It's incredible. I treat a couple of kids with cystic fibrosis. This is a really big herb that I use to nurture and protect and support their lung tissue.
Yeah, wow. And
another one of my favourites is called mullein. And this is a traditional herb of Europe and the UK. And again, this has got some lovely research around it for dry cough and that really thick phlegm that is impossible to expectorate or get up. So the expectorant action of this beautiful herb mullein comes from an active called some saponins. For sore throat, we want a soothing action. So marshmallow, slippery elm and licorice are some of my favourites. Even just brewing up a really good quality licorice tea is really soothing on a sore throat. Don't forget that garlic honey. That's also very good.
I love the Ovio teas, the marshmallow soothe. That's my favourite for a sore throat.
Yeah. Absolutely. We are big fans of Ovio and stock their gorgeous teas here at our practice. Now, mucous membrane herbs, I use golden seal. That's the king mucous membrane repairer, heals and seals inflamed and damaged mucous membranes. And I always think when you see in a yellow catarrh, in a yellow mucus, you go in with golden seal because it tells you there's an infection. Very unique herb. It's incredible. It's a plant of the North American Indian tradition. And then ribwort is similar in its action for repairing damaged and inflamed respiratory mucous membranes. So they're some of my go-tos, some of my favourites at this time of the year.
Great, amazing. So I have a little note here to talk about cytokine storm herbs. I think we've already touched on that. We've spoken about turmeric, we've spoken about yeah, I think we gave that a good coverage. So I think that's it. Thank you so much, Angela, for all your wealth of knowledge. We got lots of herbal tips there, but also some home remedies. So people can get onto this straight away, starting immediately. It was so lovely to speak to you, Angela, and I look forward to catching up again soon to talk about herbs.
Right. Thanks for having me on, Britt. See you.
Bye. Bye.